a folded silk scarf, a drawer that did not want to open, and underneath both of them, a small velvet case that should not have existed in that room at all. Princess Anne opened it at 2:20 on a Tuesday afternoon at Clarence House, and inside sat an emerald bracelet that the royal collection had been carrying as lost since 1997. Diana's bracelet, in a locked drawer inside Camilla's private dressing room. Anne did not shout. She did not send for anybody. She has never in her life been a woman who fills a room with noise when the situation has already told her everything. She lifted the bracelet out of the case, held it up to the window light for about 4 seconds, and worked out in that time that somebody in that household had been lying to the family for a very long while. The next 10 minutes are the reason we are all talking about this, and I am going to hold them back for a bit, because if I give it to you now, you will hear it as an anecdote about a stubborn aunt. Stay with me, and you will hear it the way Camilla heard it. Quick, by the end of this, you will know how a bracelet with a name on it walked out of a locked room and stayed gone for nearly 30 years. You will know whose handwriting sits on the page that made it disappear. And you will understand why the king signed something that afternoon that took a set of keys off his own wife. Hit subscribe if this is your kind of thing, and stay with me, because the last 10 minutes are where the whole thing lands. Now, the afternoon itself. Anne had not gone to Clarence House looking for a scandal. She had gone there to do paperwork, which is the least glamorous sentence anybody has ever written about a royal story, and also the most accurate one. The household had opened a fresh review of Diana's private possessions after a catalogue number came back wrong. One line on one page did not match the object it was supposed to describe. That is how these things start. Never with a confession. Always with a number. Anne is the obvious person to hand that job to, and everybody in the building knew it. She has topped the royal engagement lists for years, which the papers report every January like a weather forecast. She does the work nobody films. She does not have an interest in the outcome. She is not in line for any of it, and she has spent 50 years being the one member of that family who says the thing out loud in a room where everybody else is being careful. And if you want to understand why the household treats her the way it does, there are 2 things on the public record that tell you everything. In March 1904, a man stopped her car on the Mall in central London, shot 4 people around her, and tried to pull her out of the back seat. He told her to get out. She told him not bloody likely. That is not a legend anybody built afterwards. That is her own account, given at the time, and the man who did it went to the Old Bailey for it. She was 23 years old. And in November 2022, as the BBC and every other outlet reported at the time, Charles wrote to the House of Lords asking for the list of councillors of state to be widened. The bill went through in a matter of weeks, and the 2 names added were Anne and Edward. The king wanted people he could hand his own authority to without thinking about it twice, and his sister was on the shortest possible list. A catalogue number came back wrong, and the household gave the job to her. Nobody in that building expected it to end where it ended. The mismatched number led her down a corridor and into a dressing room that only one person uses. Camilla was out that afternoon. The rooms were quiet in the way big houses go quiet when the person who lives in them is elsewhere, and every floorboard felt louder than it should have. The drawer stuck. Anne worked it open, lifted out a folded silk scarf and found the case underneath. Now the bracelet. Emeralds, gold, diamonds, and a clasp with a repair in it. That repair is the whole thing. Diana broke that clasp during a family evening, years before she died, and she had it mended, and the mend is visible if you know to put your thumb on it. Anne knew. She was in the room the night it broke. She pressed her thumb against the clasp, felt the join, and every possible innocent explanation went out of the window at once. This was not a similar bracelet from the same maker. This was not a copy from a set. This was the one. And underneath the case, folded flat, Anne found an old inventory label. Diana's initials on it, and a date years before Camilla was ever crowned anything. and that detail turns the whole thing from an embarrassment into something else. Whoever put that case in that drawer knew exactly what was inside it. Nobody hides a thing they have not identified. The label had come along with the bracelet, and somebody had kept them together and then locked both of them under a scarf. Anne put the bracelet in her coat pocket. She closed the case, locked the drawer, walked out and gave the officer on that corridor an instruction in about 11 words. Nobody enters this room. Not staff, not the household, not the Queen. An aide asked her who they should telephone. She gave one name, Charles. And before the king had even left his desk, word had already reached Camilla that somebody had been in her drawer. Hold that, because you now know what Anne found and where she found it. You do not yet know how it got there, and you do not know what else was in that room. Both of those answers are coming, and the second one is worse than the first. Look at what that bracelet actually is to each person standing in this story, because they are four completely different objects depending on who is holding it. To the collection, it is a line on a page. Emeralds, gold, diamonds, one entry among thousands. To Anne, it is the evening it broke. A family dinner, a clasp giving way, Diana laughing about it and holding the two ends together in her palm for the rest of the night. To Camilla, it is something she has never explained to anybody, and the fact that she never explained it is the entire problem. And to Charles, it is a door he has spent about 30 years leaning against. Now, Anne and Diana were never close. That is not gossip, that is the settled version of it, reported for decades and never seriously disputed by anybody who was around them. Two women with nothing in common except a surname they had both married into. One of them lived at the front of every camera in Europe. The other one had spent her life going out of her way to avoid exactly that. They were polite. They were not friends. And that is precisely why this matters. Anne did not pick that bracelet up out of sentiment. She has no soft memory of Diana to defend. She picked it up because it had a name on the label, and the name was not the name of the woman whose drawer it was sitting in. Somebody had taken a dead woman's property, altered the paperwork, and kept it. A woman who, like Diana, might have made a scene about it. Anne made a phone call and sealed a door. Charles came, and he came fast, and he asked to see it before he had finished sitting down. He held it under the desk lamp, turned it over, found the repair with his thumb the same way his sister had, which tells you he knew about it too. Then he set it down on the blotter and said nothing at all. Anne watched every second of that. His silence was the worst answer available. A denial would have been a position. Confusion would have been a position. Charles gave her recognition instead, and recognition means he knew what the bracelet was, and, worse, he seemed to understand straight away why finding it in that particular drawer was going to tear something open. Meanwhile, Camilla was 2 rooms away taking her gloves off, and she stopped halfway through and asked a senior aide whether Anne had removed anything from her dressing room. The aide could not answer her. He did not know. Her face changed anyway. Nobody has put that afternoon on the record, and nobody involved is going to. I am building these rooms from the paper trail that came afterwards and from how people who work in that household describe a day like this one going. Take the next few minutes as my reading of it. That same aide is the source of the first genuinely strange piece of this. In a documented household account, he described Camilla some years earlier, referring to an unnamed emerald piece as something she was protecting until the right time. Protecting. Until the right time. No transfer document exists. Nobody signed anything over to her. And when Anne pulled the collection register, the bracelet was there, with a note beside it saying it had been removed for conservation. The workshop named in that entry never received it. Anne had somebody ring them and check. No record, no delivery, no job number, nothing. Somebody had written a lie into the register, and then the object had gone. Charles cleared the room of everybody except his sister, and asked her not to go near Camilla until she had heard the full history of it. Anne told him she was not promising him anything. and that history starts on a single evening at Kensington Palace in the autumn after Diana died. The bracelet did not simply drift out of the collection over a decade. It went missing on one specific night, in one specific room, where every object had been counted and every person coming through the door had been written down. Somebody in the comments a while back asked me what actually happens to a royal's things after they die, so let's do that properly for a second, because you cannot follow this story without it. The household runs what it calls a memorial inventory. A team goes through the private possessions object by object, photographs each one, puts a label on it, and rules on what stays with the family and what goes into the wider royal collection. Every object gets a number and every number gets a name beside it. That process is the reason this story exists at all. Somebody wrote William's name on a label in 1997, and 27 years later that label was still in the drawer with the bracelet, which is the one thing the people who moved it could not make disappear. Diana's was done at Kensington Palace, and Charles had temporary authority over the disputed items, because William and Harry were 15 and 12, and nobody was asking a grieving child to rule on jewelry. Put yourself in that building for a second, because the timing matters. The flowers outside those gates were still there. The country had watched two boys walk behind a coffin through central London on the 6th of September, and the pictures of that walk were on the front of everything. And inside the house, while all of that was going on, a team of people with clipboards was working through her wardrobes and her jewelry boxes, writing numbers on labels. Somebody has to do it. That is not a criticism of anybody in that room. It is simply the least human thing that happens after a death, and it was happening about 4 weeks after the least human month that family has ever lived through. During that review, the emerald bracelet was photographed, labeled, and put into a velvet case marked for William. Marked for him, in writing, with his name on it. And late that evening, after most of the staff had already gone home, Camilla came into the sorting room. Last week, I covered Princess Anne in tears, and the reason she lost her memory, and how the truth behind that stunned the rest of the family. A lot of you came into the comments saying the same thing, that Anne is the only one in that house who never flinches. This video is what happens when she stops flinching in somebody else's dressing room. Back to that sorting room. Camilla asked why certain pieces were being permanently reserved for Diana's sons. Charles told her flatly that the bracelet was not hers to discuss, and she gave him an answer that a former household official later described in a documented account, and it is the sentence that explains the next 25 years. Diana's possessions, she said, would go on controlling this family until somebody finally decided where the past was allowed to end. Charles dropped his voice and ordered the last of the staff out of the room. He was trying to stop an argument from traveling through the household by morning. He achieved the opposite of what he wanted. He emptied the only room in the building where a witness might have been standing. And then he made the decision that cost his son a bracelet for 27 years. He instructed the remaining boxes to be moved overnight into a private storage suite run by his own household. By the morning, the velvet case with William's name on it was gone. Nobody raised an alarm. Nobody ordered a search. Charles assumed the item was secure because it was inside his own arrangements, and years later that assumption reads less like trust and more like a man deciding not to look. Anne went through the copied register page with a pencil, and she found it. The original wording said reserved for Prince William. Somebody had gone over it and written removed for specialist conservation. No conservator signed the entry. No return date beside it. And the handwriting belonged to a former aide who, some years after writing it, went to work in Camilla's private office. Anne laid the old inventory photograph next to the bracelet on the desk. Same repaired clasp. Same stones in the same order. Then she pushed the falsified register across the table to her brother and waited. Diana used to say, emeralds meant renewal. Anne closed the register and said the thing that was actually true, which is that the bracelet had never been forgotten by anybody. It had been moved out of a boy's reach on purpose. An aide came in at that point and said the Queen wanted access to her dressing room. Anne said no. Camilla was not going into that room until she came and stood in front of her first. The paperwork explained how the bracelet went. Only one person in that building could explain why it was still sitting under a scarf 27 years later, and Anne had run out of interest in silence as an answer. There were no advisors sitting between them. No private secretary drafted anything. No ceremonial language sanded the edges of it. Anne walked into the King's Library carrying the velvet case open in both hands. Camilla was already there, beside Charles. Anne put the bracelet down on the table between them, looked straight at her, and asked the question that made a polite exit impossible for everybody in the room. Diana's bracelet. Your locked drawer. Explain that to me. Charles had picked the library because he thought 4 walls and no staff might contain it. He was thinking about the size of the thing. A dispute over a dead princess's jewelry involving the Queen, breaking into public in a year when the monarchy is already carrying more than it wants to carry. Anne did not sit down. She made it clear this was not about an old rivalry between 2 women, one of whom has been dead since 1997. This was about a marked object, an altered record, and a locked drawer. Camilla gave her first answer, and it was a decent one. She said the bracelet had been put in her care during repeated household moves, because Charles was afraid it would vanish among hundreds of boxes. She had preserved it. She had not stolen it. Keeping it close by had kept it safe from exactly the sort of muddle that swallows things in that family. Anne did not raise her voice. People who have worked with her will tell you that the volume never goes up, and that this is the thing to watch for, because the questions get shorter instead. If the point was protection, she asked, why did protection require it to sit in a personal drawer under a scarf, rather than in the archive, where every important object in that family gets logged and guarded and can be found by anybody with the right form? Then she pushed the falsified conservation entry across the table and asked for the name of the person who approved it. Camilla reached out toward the emeralds. Anne shut the case, snapped it closed with the flat of her hand before the other woman's fingers reached the stones, and the noise went round that library like a dropped plate. Charles turned his face away. It was never yours to keep, Anne said. And Charles finally spoke, and what he said took the floor out from under his wife. He had never instructed her to keep the bracelet indefinitely. His only order, that autumn at Kensington, had been to secure Diana's inventory during the transfer. Nothing more than that. Nothing about custody. Nothing about years. Camilla's composure went at that point, and she told them why she had kept it. She had found a handwritten note from Diana. In it, Diana asked that the bracelet be given to her son before his wedding. Charles physically pulled back in his chair and asked why he had never been shown that note. And Camilla said the honest thing, which is somehow worse than a lie. Diana's words would have walked into another defining moment in that family. Another wedding, another anniversary, another day belonging to somebody else with a dead woman's handwriting placed in the middle of it. She had been frightened of what the letter would wake up. Anne looked at her without moving for a while, and then she said that the bracelet was now only half of it. She wanted the note, she wanted the original inventory, and she wanted the names of everybody who had helped bury both. Camilla had admitted the concealment, and the admission opened a much bigger hole, because one woman can hide a bracelet in a drawer. Only a group of people can hide its history for 27 years. By that afternoon, Anne's questions had left the drawer and gone into the machinery. Access logs, rewritten inventory pages, instructions issued from a private office, transfers with no explanation attached to them. All of it started forming a chain, and at the middle of the chain sat something uncomfortable, which is that this survived because a number of people decided that protecting Camilla's position mattered more than carrying out a dead woman's last written instruction. Anne ran the review because Charles asked her to, and he asked her because she is the only senior member of that family with nothing at all to gain from the result. She is not in the line, she does not inherit. She has spent 50 years being the one they send when the situation requires somebody who cannot be leaned on. She asked for every inventory page, every security entry, every transfer note, and every piece of correspondence attached to that bracelet from the night of the memorial inventory onward. And the balance in that house got dangerous, fast. Camilla controls her own private staff and her own possessions. Charles holds the official records. Anne was carrying the authority of the review and a bracelet in her coat pocket. None of the three could dismiss either of the others, and every page that came back pushed them closer to something none of them could put back in a box. The first real hit landed on Charles. The review turned up the equerry who had approved the false conservation entry, and it turned out he had acted on a verbal instruction that came through Camilla's office. But the instruction had been carried with the king's name attached to it, to give it weight. Somebody had used Charles to move Diana's bracelet, and Charles had not known. Camilla went to him before more files could be opened and asked him to stop the review. Her argument was not stupid. Old letters would drag private pain into the open without changing a single thing that had already happened. Charles put his pen down and told her that he could not protect something he had never been told about in the first place. He sat alone with the papers after she left, read Diana's original inventory page again. And he said the thing to his sister that I suspect he has been circling for 20 years, which is that avoiding a fight had let other people rewrite what happened. His silence had looked like keeping the peace at the time. Looked at now, with a falsified register in front of him, it looks like permission. Then the review found the envelope. 2 days after the memorial inventory at Kensington, a green envelope in Diana's handwriting had been delivered to Camilla's private secretary. Beside it on the transfer record, an instruction. Retain privately, and the Queen's initials next to that. The note and the bracelet had gone down the same road on the same week. Charles signed a custody order that evening. A custody order takes disputed property out of one person's hands and puts it under a neutral official until somebody works out where it belongs. Every item connected to Diana came out of Camilla's personal control. He stopped with the nib on the paper before he finished the signature. He told Anne that silence had held that household together for a very long time, and that today it was going to cost him his son's trust if he used it again. Then he signed. And before anybody had said a word to her about it, Camilla's staff found 3 storage rooms already locked. The consequences arrived with no announcement whatsoever, which is how that building has always done its most brutal work. A security officer standing outside a private archive. A long-serving aide asked to hand over an access card. 3 doors sealed under the king's authority. No statement, no meeting, no explanation offered to anybody. And for the first time since she became queen, Camilla walked up to a door in a royal residence, and it did not open for her. She went to the archive expecting the officer to step aside. He did not step aside. She tried the card. It refused. She tried it again, and it refused in exactly the same tone. And there is no dignified way to stand in a corridor doing that twice while a man in a suit watches you do it. She put her hand down and asked whether Charles had personally approved the restriction. The officer said quietly that the king's order could not be overridden. That is the scene I keep coming back to in this whole story. Not the library, not the drawer. A woman who spent 30 years getting into that building, standing outside one of its doors with a card that has stopped working, being told no by an employee. She walked back down that corridor past two members of her own staff who had seen the whole thing and were doing their level best to be somewhere else with their eyes. That is the moment the story turned in that house. Not the paperwork. A locked door and two witnesses. Two members of her office went on temporary leave the same afternoon. Both of them had handled the altered inventory, and one of them had handled the green envelope. Camilla went back to her sitting room and accused her private secretary of failing to destroy the old transfer slip. He answered her, and the answer is in a recorded internal interview, and it is the single most damning line in the file. Nobody had expected Anne to identify the bracelet on sight. That is it. That is the whole security model. They had assumed that if anybody ever opened that drawer, the person opening it would not know what they were looking at. They picked the wrong drawer for the wrong woman on the wrong afternoon. After the staff had gone, Camilla took off her wedding ring, put it on the table, and sat looking at the empty drawer where the bracelet had been living. For a few seconds, there she was not a queen. She was somebody watching every private decision she had made in 30 years arrive at the same time. And then the suspended secretary produced the thing that made the afternoon worse. Diana's note had never been destroyed. Somebody had moved it into a locked correspondence box carrying Charles's old cipher from his years as Prince of Wales. The letter had been sitting inside the king's own paperwork the entire time. Camilla finally said why it frightened her. Diana had not written only about a bracelet. She had written about William, about his future marriage, and about what happens to a family when resentment gets to decide who inherits what. The register proved concealment. The letter proved motive. Camilla had understood that difference from the beginning, which is why the envelope moved and never came back. Anne took that news without any satisfaction in it at all. She asked one question, which was why hearing a woman's last written wish had required tearing through 27 years of amended paperwork to get to it. And then she asked Charles for one thing. The two of them, in the correspondence room, alone. No Camilla, no lawyers, no aides, no private secretary standing by the door with a pad. Brother and sister. The two of them are 2 years apart. They were children together in those buildings. They have spent their whole adult lives in the same job at different volumes. And as far as anybody can establish, they had never once sat down and talked properly about the autumn of 1997. And I want to make something clear about why she asked for that, because it was not sentiment either. Anne has never once in 50 years asked a member of her family for a private conversation in front of a witness. She asked for that room because whatever Charles was going to say next, she did not want a version of it that had been shaped for an audience. Charles carried the key. Anne carried the bracelet. He unlocked the cabinet, and she worked through the numbered boxes against the transfer record. And for a long stretch, neither of them said anything at all. Two people in their 70s going through a filing system, looking for a letter that should have been delivered when one of them still had a teenage son at home. The green envelope was underneath a stack of old household correspondence. Anne recognized the handwriting before she had it fully out of the box. Diana's writing across the front, William's name on it, and the wax still holding. And Anne did not open it. She held it for a moment, then put it flat on the table with her hand on top of it, and said that the envelope had already been opened by one person who had no business opening it, and it was not going to happen twice. Charles said what he should have said in 1997, that every item meant for his son had been his responsibility. That exhaustion, guilt, and a horror of another public family fight had turned, somewhere along the line, into an excuse for not looking. Anne answered him without any heat in it, which is the way she does the hard ones. The bracelet in a drawer was not the real damage, she told him. The damage was that he had let Diana's memory turn into a thing the household negotiated around. Something to be managed, worked round, kept away from anniversaries, filed under difficult. A woman gets reduced to an administrative problem, and then one day her jewelry is under a scarf and nobody can explain why. Then she took the envelope and the bracelet, and she went to find William. He read it out loud, in a room with his father and his aunt, and he got most of the way through it. Diana had written that the emerald bracelet should pass to him before his marriage. She wanted him to be the one to decide what happened to it afterwards. Whether it went to the woman who helped him build a home that felt like a home, or whether he kept it back for his children. She had trusted a boy of 15 with that decision in advance, because she had assumed somebody would hand him the letter. That is the bit I cannot get past. Diana wrote that note while she was still alive, about a wedding she expected to be sitting at. She was planning a normal afternoon in the future, the kind every mother plans, where you give your son a thing and tell him it is his to do something with. She had no idea she was writing an instruction that would be filed, initialed, and buried inside a locked box for 27 years. He was married in 2011. He was married in front of 2 billion people, and his mother's letter about that wedding was in a cabinet 40 minutes away with somebody else's initials on the transfer slip. And then his voice went. Charles moved his hand toward his son, stopped, and then put it on his shoulder anyway, and the king said the sentence that ended the argument. The bracelet belongs with your family, and no decision made in this house should ever have sat above your mother's wish. The last part of the letter is the part that has stayed with me. Diana asked her son never to let bitterness decide the fate of things that matter. Love should choose what gets kept, she wrote, and what gets forgiven, and who ends up holding the pieces of a family's past. She wrote that in the 90s, about a bracelet, and it turned out to be about the next 30 years. William did not forgive his father in that room. He also did not take the hand off his shoulder. Then he asked to speak to Catherine. The bracelet had come back and the truth had come back with it. The next decision was still open, and the answer to it turned a locked drawer into the most photographed wrist in Britain. By the following morning, the palace had lost control of it, which is what always happens. The bracelet that vanished from Diana's collection had been recovered from the Queen's private drawer. The altered inventory had been confirmed in writing, and William had decided he was not putting the emeralds back in a box. Buckingham Palace released a statement with the fingerprints of 6 different people on it, confirming that a personal item belonging to Diana, Princess of Wales, had been returned to the Prince of Wales following a review of historic household records. The statement also confirmed, in one flat line that everybody in the country read 4 times, that the Queen no longer held control over possessions connected to Diana while the review continued. Catherine got the bracelet in private. William put the velvet case down beside the letter and waited while she read the last paragraph, and then read it again. She asked him whether he was sure he wanted her wearing it this soon. He knew exactly what she was asking. Lock it away, and secrecy keeps the last word on it forever. Put it on a wrist and walk it past a crowd, and half the country reads it as an act of war against Camilla. He told her it was not revenge. His mother had written down what she wanted done with it, and doing that thing 30 years late is not an attack on anybody. Leaving it in a drawer is what would finish the job the drawer started. Catherine fastened it before she left for a children's charity meeting at Kensington Palace. Kensington, the house Diana lived in, the house those boys grew up in, the gates the flowers were stacked against in September 1997. A crowd had gathered. Catherine got out of the car and lifted a hand to them, and the sleeve of her coat moved back about 2 inches, and the emeralds came out into the daylight for the first time since Diana wore them. There is a couple of seconds on that footage where nobody in the crowd makes a sound. Then the applause started, and it did not stop for a while. The picture was everywhere inside 20 minutes. One of the London papers cleared the whole front page for a photograph of a raised hand and a wrist and put 4 words over the top of it. Diana's emeralds come home. and the crowd outside those gates had worked it out before the newsrooms did. People who had been standing there since the morning for a photograph of the Princess of Wales realized what they were actually looking at, and you can hear it happen on the amateur footage. Somebody says the word bracelet, somebody else says Diana, then the noise. Flowers started going against those railings again by the afternoon. Not many. Enough that the pictures ran side by side with the pictures from September 1997, which is the comparison every editor in the country reached for, and none of them had to explain. Nobody has confirmed whether Catherine knew the sleeve would move, and I am reading her rather than quoting her. Watch the footage anyway, because a woman who has spent 15 years managing exactly where her cuffs sit in front of a camera lifted that particular hand at that particular gate. Broadcasters spent the evening describing it, and none of them called it jewelry. They called it a promise from a mother to a son, arriving 30 years late and being handed on by that son to a family his mother never got to meet. Camilla watched the replay on her own in her sitting room. She sat still through the pictures, and when the commentator got to the part explaining where the bracelet had been found, she turned the television off. Charles moved before the public reaction could get any bigger. He called Anne, William, and Camilla together for one final meeting, and this time nobody was going to debate who owned what. Britain had already reached its verdict on the pavement outside Kensington Palace. Inside the building, the king still had one thing left to sign. The last meeting ran under 20 minutes and settled 27 years. Charles came in carrying the completed review. Camilla sat with her hands folded. William put the bracelet on the table with his mother's letter beside it. Anne stood, because she almost always does. The king read the conclusion out loud, and it is worth hearing in the plain language it was written in. The bracelet was removed from the Kensington inventory without lawful approval. It was falsely listed for conservation. It was retained privately for 27 years, in direct contradiction of a written instruction from the person who owned it. William listened to the whole thing without interrupting once. Charles then confirmed that the bracelet belonged, legally and personally, to his son, and that it would go on the record inside William's own family collection rather than back into any royal office where a pen could reach it again. Camilla spoke in the recorded closing session, and to her credit she did not reach for a lawyer's sentence. She said that Diana had gone on shaping this family long after her death, and that fear and jealousy and self-protection had decided what she did with the bracelet. She had believed that keeping it out of sight would take some of the power out of the past. It did the opposite. It gave the past a locked drawer and 27 years to grow in. William did not hand out any easy forgiveness. He told her that regret does not give him back the years in which his mother's written wishes sat in somebody's correspondence box. He also refused to use the bracelet as a weapon. He is not going to spend the next 30 years running the same cycle in the other direction. Charles took his own share of it, out loud, in front of his wife and his sister and his son. Camilla concealed the jewel. His own failure to look is the reason the concealment survived. Peace bought by not asking questions, he said, was never peace in the first place. And Anne said the only thing she said in that meeting, she had gone into Clarence's house that Tuesday to correct one number on one page. She reminded the room that the household had handed her that job because everybody assumed there was nothing at the end of it. Then she told Camilla in front of the king that the bracelet had been sitting under a scarf for 27 years for one reason, which is that everybody involved had counted on nobody ever bothering to look. She did not say it as an accusation. She said it as a finding, which is worse because a finding goes on a page. Then the ruling, and it is permanent. Camilla holds no future role in anything connected to Diana. Not the jewelry, not the letters, not the memorial arrangements, not the legacy records. That door is shut, and there is no version of the next 20 years in which it opens again. Catherine will wear the bracelet on family occasions. After that, it goes to Charlotte, which keeps it in the direct line Diana named in her own handwriting. Camilla stood up to leave and did not touch the case on her way past it. William closed it, picked it up, and carried it out to his wife. Catherine put Diana's letter on top of the emeralds and turned the key. None of this undoes what was done. The drawer is empty now, the register has been corrected, and a bracelet has finally arrived at the address on the label. Diana wrote to her son about bitterness and about love deciding what gets kept, and her son read those words for the first time at the age of 43 because somebody had been afraid of what they might wake up. Camilla spent 27 years keeping that bracelet where nobody could see it, and she was right to be frightened of it, because the moment it came out into daylight on another woman's wrist, the whole country understood exactly what she had done. The scarf did not save her. The lock did not save her. Anne opened one drawer on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, and 30 years of careful work fell apart in about